Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 216 of Retropower Uncut. And unusually, you join me in our little engine build room, which James has just been having a little tidy up in because he's about to do some more Honda work in here. But we decided it was quite an important place to start this week because of this. Literally a handful of hours ago, we had a visit from Rick Wood, who was kindly dropping off this rather interesting unit in front of us. This is the power plant that will be going in the Reliant Scimitar project. Now, it seems like it's here a little bit early in proceedings. Obviously, Rick's been working on this for a little while. The reason we need it is because we need to work around this engine fairly early on in the project in terms of any further chassis work that we have to do, and certainly in terms of the body and all of the other dry build work. And while we had a dummy unit with various bits missing to do an initial feasibility check, going forward we really just need the whole unit. So obviously we need to seal it up really well and be very careful not to damage it because it is quite expensive. However, it is also a very interesting engine and something that I'm unreasonably excited about, in that I think I've mentioned this on a previous episode, but sad as this may be to some people, since I was in my teens I have always wanted to own a vehicle with one of these in. Now, I'm never going to get the chance to do that, I imagine, but the chance to build a vehicle with a Cosworth GAA engine, which is what this is, although it's a development of it, is kind of one of my life ambitions. So here we are, an engineer's ambition. Rick builds these as a new build engine, so all new parts, or 99% new parts anyway. The block is a replacement block which is cast in aluminium with quite a lot of modifications done to it, with a girdle bottom end, dry sumped engine, girdle bottom end to reinforce the bottom end of the block, and the aluminium block saves an enormous amount of weight on the engine. Obviously, as I've just said, dry sump, currently a 3-stage dry sump setup, 2-stage scavenge pump on the side and a pressure stage on the front. That will be getting revised. We're awaiting the pump because Rick was having some parts made, the drive shafts made. That will be changed to a 3-stage scavenge plus pressure stage, so 4-stage overall dry sump setup. Rick was slightly and probably unnecessarily concerned about the scavenge stage on the bigger capacity, engine. In period and in current race form, these engines race with an iron cylinder block, 3.4 litre capacity, somewhere in the ballpark of 450 horsepower. But they are a race engine, you know, they don't really do a lot until 6,500 RPM, not really a road engine. This is a 4 litre bottom end, so we've got an extra 600 cc's there straight away, and milder camshafts to bring the power level down, so effectively detuned a little bit, but much more torque. Rick's words, you know, strong pull from 1500 RPM or maybe 2000 RPM, somewhere in that region. We've got strong torque from there, so perfect in a road car, with a little bit of a sacrifice in power, but circa 450 horsepower. And a soundtrack to die for. There is just nothing else. There is no engine on the planet, in my opinion, that sounds like one of these. I'm unreasonably excited about it. There is nothing else that sounds like a Cosworth GAA V6. They're just an incredible thing. So here it is. That will be mated to the ZF 5-speed transmission that we talked about previously, fairly imminently, but there's a lot of other work going on at the moment, so it's not something we're going to pick up right this second. But we thought we'd just start the tour this week with a little look at a piece of engine pornography, we might call it, sat in our engine room. Not built here, built by Rick Wood Motorsport. And thank you, Rick, for dropping that off this morning, and keep an eye on the project. It's going to be very exciting, and it will be going back at some point in the future, which I know Jamie behind the camera is also very, very excited about. This will all be going back up to Rick's, for the actual mapping will be done at Rick's on Rick's rollers, so Rick can oversee it. as it's done, so he's there with his finger on the pulse of what's going on, because he'll treat this like his baby, and he'll want to make sure we don't do anything silly, which I'm sure we won't, but I can fully understand him trying to make sure that everything's looked after correctly. So at that point, I think we're going to pop through into the fabrication shop, so we will head in there and I'll show you what we're doing through there. So this way. And so, as if by magic, we are here in the fabrication shop at the back of the Wasabi project, and Bobby's over there beavering away on it. He's been working on the rear end of the car again. I'll show you various bits on here. There's some other bits to see just over there that we'll catch in a minute. Chiefly resolving the rear end structure. So you'd previously seen these rear corner sections that he'd made up to finish off the rear corners of the sort of the rear pockets, if you like, of the side sections of the body. The next phase on from that was to finish off these rear chassis extensions that we touched on last week, and then to build this rear structure, which appears relatively simple. It's reasonably simple, but it is actually slightly curved. The whole rear of the car has a slight curve to it. This is straight here, but then it becomes curved by there to follow the same line as the tailgate. So that section is by necessity also curved. So Bobby's made that, but he's made it wider. The original structure was a different shape in this area here. Kind of was a pressed piece of a sort of nondescript shape that was hidden behind the bumper and the light and whatever. So it didn't really matter. But we wanted to change that, simplify that corner a little bit, and then be able to pick up the structure of the end of the chassis rail. So for that reason, we've carried that line all the way on until it meets the outer face of the chassis rail, so that we could mate it in a nice clean fashion at that point. So that's what he's done there. Screwed together at the moment, ready for plug welding. And then at that point, once the strength was back in the rear end of the car there, Bobby's removed the spare wheel well from the Audi half portion of the body shell, trimmed all that up, trimmed all that off and got all that cleaned up, and then he's made a new corner section in the front left-hand corner of that to give that symmetry. It was asymmetric originally. It's off-centre still, but he's created some symmetry in the corners so that no, it's not, I tell a lie, it's not off-centre, it is now centred, but originally the corners were asymmetric. He's now made a new corner for the left-hand side of that and shaped that up so that it's symmetrical with the right-hand side, and then he's currently working on the boot floor section in here. Now interestingly, in true Bobby fashion, he's today has also been working on a couple of other things. If we wander over this way, we will come around here. He has also been working on our bead roller, which was bought from Stakes's metalwork machinery a while ago, and it's great with one of his electric conversions on it. Really good bit of kit. One of the things that we occasionally need when working on smaller pieces is a bit of a table on it like this. So Bobby's drawn one up and made one this morning, just plasma cut this out and folded it up and knocked this up so that he can actually work solo on this, because without that he repeatedly needs to have somebody to help him feed panels through the machine, and that was becoming a bit problematic. So he's now set up a table so he can do that, and then he's been doing some experiments, some circle, put a centre on it so that he can make circles and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, Bobby's been doing a bit of work on that, and he's now literally just cutting out the blanks for doing the boot floor section for the Saab. So that's the next phase moving forward on that. We'll then whiz back round here because we're going to move on to the E-Type, and I'll talk about what Matt is working on this. So Matt has been working chiefly on, I'll fall off this step, Matt's chiefly been working on the boot floor reinforcement. So there are now 4 ribs, Matt's made 4 ribs that stiffen the boot floor and add structure to the boot floor and add structure to the rear of the car, because otherwise the whole of this rear section of the car was basically an egg. A very strong egg, but an egg nonetheless that we don't want to crack. So to add some stiffness to that, he's cast a flat plane through the bottom of that egg with a laser, marked that out, and then within that fabricated 4 top hat sections, each made in 3 pieces. So an upside down channel section, and then 2 90-degree sections that are then curved and shaped to fit the compound curvature of the boot floor, and then those sections are then trimmed and spot welded into the upper channel sections, and then those are all bonded in place. What we're using is an epoxy panel bonding compound in there. It's a Pleo Grip product supplied by Wayside Adhesives, but it's a Pleo Grip product which is a structural adhesive. It's designed for automotive structural use, and that's actually bonding all of those sections in, so we don't risk putting distortion into the bottom of the boot floor. Our spot welder won't reach all the way around that, so we would have to plug weld it. If we plug weld it, we will probably add some distortion. So given the structure, the area and the use for that area, we've decided we're just going to go for bonding those sections in. With the bond area involved, it's more than strong enough. It's probably stronger than the spot welds would have been. So that's all in and done. Really nice job of that. That's then moved on now to working on the spare wheel carrier, which is going to be fabricated into that area. You'll be able to see that next week. At the moment, he's just started on it. Rather than explaining that, I'm just going to let you see it next week, basically. But he's started to fabricate a reasonably pretty looking piece to go in there to add further stiffness and also take the load of the spare wheel and manage that during driving. The next phase after that will be to add the carrier for the battery, which is going into this corner here underneath there. He'll then be fabricating the battery carrier, which is also going to tie into those boot floor stiffeners as well. So that's all work to come. The other little bit Matt's been working on is this bowl up here, which is the bowl for the filler cap. You'll see, if you haven't already seen, you'll see in Cal's section this week the CAD work that's been done for the fuel filler cap for this, which is going in the centre of the deck panel, which is a lot more reachable when this car's on the ground than it is here. You have to bear in mind we're a long way up in the air on the jig here. So Matt this morning has fabricated a rather nice little bowl for the fuel filler to reside into, with a little drain pipe added to it, so the rainwater will all run out of it and can make its way across, and then we'll pipe that through and out into the inner wheel arch. So that's what Matt's been working on there, making this this bowl section for the fuel filler. And I think that's pretty much where we're at on metal fabrication on the E-Type. There's a few little bits of fiddling around and tidying up that's been done, some screws removed, bits of spot welding done, various other things there. But again, more next week in terms of further detail on that. Moving on from that, I'm going to reverse my way over here. Stu has been busy on a variety of things on the XJC. I think he'd actually done this last week, but I don't think I mentioned it. He's tidied up the front panel and removed the original snorkel. I talked about the air filter arrangement last week, which is now basically done. He's just waiting for me to CNC plasma out the bezel that goes in the top of there to screw the top onto, but I've not done that yet, so that's why that's not done. He's then moved on to various stuff to do with the bulkhead. So he's got the air conditioning bulkhead fittings fitted to the bulkhead so that we can work out the hard lines in the engine bay. Stu's got the screen wash tank in place. He's modified the inner wing to allow for the fitment of that and got that mock-up when we've got a 3D print. We use a tank, we have started using and have on the last few projects tanks from a company called Doga in Spain, who make a lot of OEM screen wash tanks and filler solutions, if you like, for those tanks, flexible necks and things. So we're using a Doga tank in this, and Stu's got that mounted. He's also made a rather nice stainless steel mounting for the power steering header tank, which we're using an ATE type tank for that. They're available new and they're a nice tank, just look neat and work. So we're using an ATE tank for the fill on that. And he's got the pedal box mounted so we can finalise the clutch pedal fitment. We're actually, I think I touched on this last week, we're actually going to get a pedal box from Simply Performance, but at the moment Stu's put this pedal box in just to check alignments and things like that. And then I believe he's moving on to the air conditioning plumbing. And I know the other thing. My memory is failing me. He's currently working on the rear boot release button, because we are re-engineering the back of the boot lid and removing a lot of clutter from the boot lid, because the standard boot lid has a number of bits of clutter on it. Basically, we're decluttering that. We're putting in a new, a different boot release and lock, which you will see in Cal's section of the video, but Stu is now putting Luke's handiwork into actual practice in the metal by adding the mountings for that part, which you'll see in a bit. So that's what Stu's currently working on, is that area, and also a modification to the fuel filler necks in the rear deck panel. We have a solution on the fuel filler necks, which you'll see, but part of that involves changing a couple of the mounting holes slightly to enable us to fit that. So you'll see when it's all done, but that's what Stu's working on at the moment. So not enormously photogenic work there, though the boot release will be a very nice piece once that's all finished. Very interesting to see. I think at that point, that's probably a reasonable point to round up what's going on in the metal shop. But now I'm going to do another click of my fingers and move myself into the body prep area. We're not going to try and walk through on camera because we'll fall over something, because I have been working on some fiberglass this week for the Allegro side skirts. You'll recall that we had machined the patterns and we were getting other things in place, and we 3D printed the ends. I can now show you where we're at with that. So here we are with some partially made fiberglass moulds. I'm progressing reasonably well with this. Bear with me during this explanation. I am not an expert in composites manufacture. However, we've elected to do some of our smaller composite work in-house. As I say, the bulk of our work is done by KS Composites. All of our larger panels and larger tooling is done by KS Composites in Melton Mowbray. However, for smaller parts, there's no reason we can't do those in-house. And it gives us a little bit of flexibility and means that we don't need to burden KS with some of the smaller parts. We can leave them concentrating on the big, high jeopardy, very large tooling items that we can't really make in-house very well. These side skirts, the Allegro, are a good case of something that we could make in-house. They're going to be a fiberglass part, not a carbon fibre part, so that if they become damaged, they're cheaper to replace, and they're a bit more, you know, they're thicker, sturdier, better for stone chips, just general gravel rash part of the car. Nice to make it out of fiberglass. It's an expendable part more than anything. So you saw in previous episodes we'd made a pattern which is now nestling inside this section here, as you can see by the shape. That's inside here. Previously you'd seen us make the fiberglass splitters for the front of the Allegros. Now they were moulded in a direct machined mould. So we machined the mould from MDF, surfaced it with a polyester surfacer, sanded it and polished it, and then moulded the parts directly in that. However, we couldn't machine, because of the shape of these parts, we couldn't directly machine them. And in fact, we can't directly mould them either. We can directly mould them. We need to make a multi-piece mould, a split mould, to be able to make the parts from them. And these moulds have actually got to be made in 4 pieces. So we have this section you can see here, and then a back piece and 2 end pieces, and they all need to be able to split apart for us to be able to get the pattern out and to be able to get the final part out. So to that end, it's been a learning curve and reasonably enjoyable one. Kind of know all the theory, but actually putting it into practice is quite interesting. So here we are making the moulds in fiberglass using a tooling resin. It's a Scott Barder product, Optimold. Bought from East Coast Fiberglass. This is East Coast Fiberglass Supplies, and it's a vinyl ester resin system, so that you can make carbon fibre parts in it should you want to. I should point out here, if you make moulds using polyester resin, there is an issue with inhibiting the cure of carbon fibre parts. Epoxy, because you would use an epoxy resin for a carbon fibre part. If you put an epoxy resin in a polyester resin mould, the polyester inhibits the cure of the epoxy resin. That's generally a bad thing, so you mustn't do that. These are vinyl ester resin moulds using the Optimold system, which is available from East Coast Fiberglass, and I believe Easy Composites also sell the same system, but the resins are made by Scott Barder. So yeah, these are made, obviously there's quite a sequence of events here. We make the pattern. The pattern was made in, the central part was in polyurethane tooling board. The ends were 3D printed in carbon fibre reinforced PETG, I believe. Then the ends were glued on. The whole lot was smoothed, given a fine covering of sprayed polyester, sanded to 320 grit paper all over. then that was primed, spot primed and waxed, so that the whole lot was very shiny, and then it was glued down to this vinyl wrap topped piece of moisture resistant MDF as a flat board. That was checked for flat first, then both of those two polished patterns were then glued down to that board so they can't move. Glued down with, I used some hot glue and just stuck them down with hot glue, so they won't move around, but they are as good as dead flush with the top of this. And then at that point it start making the mould, and to do that we have to create some split lines so that we can get it all apart afterwards. So we elected to make this large front section, if you like, first, which we know has got a release angle on it. It can come away this way, so we make that bit first. So to do that, we have to put a split line on the back, which was, I used some plastic sign board that we had lying around, some old signs basically, stuck them to the back of the mould, held them in place using filler, wooden blocks and glue, and then the same on the ends, create split lines using plastic board, polypropylene's ideal, basically polypropylene board on the ends, on the back, hold it in place with filler and glue and blocks of wood and whatever else comes to hand. Basically bodge all that together to hold all those pieces of flat plastic in place. Once you've got those in place, check all your polishing's okay. Use fillet wax, which is just a beeswax, to fill any crevices and gaps all the way round the boards to the pattern so that no resin can creep in. And once you've done that, then you apply a fine coating, a dust coating of PVA, PVA release agent, which enables the gel coat to grip to the pattern, but also enables it to come off afterwards. So we put a dust coating of PVA release agent, which is what this blue stuff is, all over that. Then we start the layup, which is for the mould tool, and the layup consists of 2 coats of tooling gel coat, which is a vinyl ester gel coat. So 2 coats of that. Let's put one coat on, let it cure, well, let it tack off. Second coat on, let that tack off. Then at that point you put a thing called a coupling coat on. And the coupling coat is a single, which is what you can see here actually, is a single 300 gram per square metre layer of chopped strand mat held in place by a coupling resin, which is a vinyl ester resin, which is the first layer of resin behind the gel coat, which is then designed to be able to couple a structural tooling resin onto the back of. So you put one layer of that in, and basically what that does is enable you to get any air bubbles out, and enable you to get a really good first layer down so that you know it's absolutely intact. You can see air bubbles in that 300 GSM. You can see some here. They're off the tool. This section down here is the mould. This bit up here is just the overlap on the outside, so those bubbles aren't going to cause any problem. But it enables you to see really accurately whether there's any bubbles at all in there and whether you're going to get a good mould from it. Once you've done that, you then put this layer here on, which is the structural layer, and that is 3 layers of 450 gram per square metre chopped strand mat with a tooling resin applied to it, and that's all laid up in one hit. That's all laid up in one go, and it's very thick, obviously very thick with those 3 layers of 450 gram mat, so that the resin, when it catalyses, generates an enormous amount of heat, and it basically bakes itself. So there's no need to oven. There's no need to post-cure this in an oven after it's done. It basically post-cures itself by virtue of getting extremely hot. And you may be able to see on the time lapse we did me using a heat gun, just because the ambient temperature is a little bit low, using a heat gun just to get that reaction started on this. Once that reaction kicks off, get it going with the heat gun. Once it goes off, it supplies its own heat. It's very exothermic, and this takes itself to about 70 degrees C automatically, just using the exotherm from the resin going off. And at that point, it's baked itself. It goes off very, very quickly, and it affects a post-cure as well, which is supposed, I'm told, I don't know this from experience, but I'm told, reduces mould distortion because it affects the post-cure that would normally take some time after demoulding the part. So that's this section, and it's basically then repeat for all the others. So as you can see, this one with the brick red here, this brick red colour here is the gel coat on this one. The gel coat is the release layer, the shiny layer that will form the inside of the mould, where we'll be moulding the final part in. That's the first 2 layers, and as you can see, I've put the coupling layer on. The next thing on this will be just to sand that off, clean it with acetone and tack the surface up with acetone, and then do this process of the tooling resin onto that. Then I've literally just got to do the 2 ends on that part, and well, we'll have the 2 moulds. So and at that point it's a case of drill all these flanges, bolt them together, trim these flanges back to a sensible distance outside of the bolts obviously, but trim all this rubbish hanging off here, that will all be cut off. Then undo all the bolts, break it apart, and I should have a mould. Inspect it and hopefully not cry horrible tears of finding lots of things wrong with my mould. It should be fine though, it should be fine, I'm reasonably confident. So I think that's probably enough of me warbling on about fiberglass. At that point, I'd normally hand over to Mark, but Mark is poorly sick. He's not very well. So I'm going to briefly mention what's been going on in the body shop, but not go into an enormous amount of detail, and Mark can pick it all up again next week when he's better. But the key step forward this week, which has involved quite a lot of heavy manoeuvring, has been getting the Jensen Interceptor into a state where the inside is painted and the underside is painted. Now, the inside is painted with a paint which we get from a company called Celimix. It's called Celimix Direct, which is a direct to metal urethane paint. Now, we don't apply it direct to the metal, we apply it over a primer, but it's a polyurethane based, very tough, very durable, really good all-round paint for sort of non-A surface applications. We use that on the interior. Has a little bit of sound deadening property as well because it goes on quite heavy. So Gaz has been busy getting that on the inside, and also then getting the underside of the car coated in its final coating of U-POL Raptor, which you'll know our process by now because we've said it 1,000 times, but we had zinc metal sprayed the car. We then put a coat of primer over the zinc metal spray, let that soak in into the sponginess of the zinc, and then we put a coating of the U-POL Raptor over that, which we're putting on with a textured finish. Most of the vehicles we're doing now, we're applying that with a textured finish. We have done some in the past where we put a smoother finish and then tinted to body colour and then lacquer over it. On this, we're choosing, and the last few cars we've done actually, we've chosen to go on with a textured finish and not clear coat over it. Horses for courses, different pros, different cons. That's what the finish that we've done on this car is. So yesterday, Gaz was doing the big slog of getting that Raptor applied, which is a full day. There's a lot of work. There is a lot of product to put on. I can't tell you, I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly how many litres now, but it's going to be of the order of 10 litres. Gaz will correct me probably, but it will be of the order of 10 litres. I certainly saw 10 litres mixed in there. It may have been a bit more than that. That's tinted with a paint. We actually use a tintable Raptor, but just tint it black. You can buy the Raptor as black. We keep it as tintable, so we can tint it to any colour, and on that car it just happens to be black, so that's tinted with a 2K gloss black paint, acrylic. You tint that with an acrylic paint, so we tint that with a 2K gloss black acrylic. So that was all mixed, obviously a huge volume of that, and then a lot of booth trips to put all that on. But the bigger issue being that car is extremely heavy, and the manoeuvring of it isn't really to rotate the car on its rotisserie isn't really a one-man job. So there's been quite a few of trips in and out of the booth, wait for the booth to clear, then somebody to go in and help Gaz to get the car moved to a different angle, because it's not something he can do on his own. It's not really safe. So yeah, that was yesterday's slog for Gary, but now the Raptor is done, the inside is done, so now it's the time for the final outside prep of the primer, which is on, and then into colour. So exciting times, and it'll be good to see it in its final colour, which I suspect will be not before Christmas, I don't think, but it certainly won't be very far into the new year. So I think at that point it is now not time to hand to Mark, as I say, but time to hand over to Cal and let him round up the assembly shop and down at the den.
Thank you very much, Nat. We're going to start with this awesome view of the Allegro. I love that kind of front three-quarter view of it. It's turned out so well, the sort of aggression at the front there, and by the time we've got the skirts on, and that's just working on now, that really completes the sort of look of it, joins the front and rear arches and just gives it that little bit of depth on the side that it needs to balance it out. I wouldn't have thought a few months ago I would have said, how awesome does that Allegro look? But I keep walking through that door behind the camera and saying exactly that. Anyway, where are we at? So battery isolators now in at the back there, and Anthony's been running the main battery cable. So we're running a ECU master isolator, which has a couple of useful functions. Obviously, the primary one being you can isolate the battery, and that's done with a push button at the front. But we can also monitor overall current draw on the system near the battery, and that can be transmitted via CAN bus to the ECU or the PDM. So you can do programming in either engine ECU or PDM that might, for instance, knock out some of the non-essential electrical systems when the overall current draw is too high. Also, there's an overall safety on there, effectively like having a big fuse on the battery, so if it goes over a preset current, however many 100 amps, it just kills it so you don't fry your battery cable. So yeah, Anthony's been running that main power cable, 50mm squared cable, right up to the stud on the bulkhead, and then there's a little distribution power loom that splits it out from there to the PDMs there, and then also to a bulkhead connector, which is here, with a little plastic cap over it at the minute, which is the power feed to the electric powered steering pump. And then also the engine, or the in-car half of the engine harness is now fitted. And you can see down in the little Xylan coated plate down there, the Deutsch Auto Sport connector, which is where the engine management loom will plug on. So once we've done the actual engine loom, that just simply plugs to that bulkhead connector down there. So that is all looking rather smart. And then Alex is just starting on the main PDM harnesses. So they're probably the most complicated ones. They sit behind the dash, they go to the switches, the instruments, the stalks, the PDMs, interface connection into the engine management harness. There'll be connectors for the doors, and then another one for the rear loom, which will probably be the next thing he's on with. So yeah, cracking on with that. All the design work's done, just getting on with making it. We got the exhaust manifolds back from Zerkatech from being ceramic coated, so that means Jim has now got that manifold on, got the whole of the system in on this car. We just need to fit Stu's lovely little heat shield that he's made over that, and that completes that. And then the other one is on the ramp to have, or would have, the same done if we had an engine in that one. I was about to say would to have the exhaust fitted, but we haven't finished the engine build for that one yet. So yeah, we're looking pretty smart on these. Loving seeing them come together. Upstairs, Luke has been on with quite a variety of tasks. Some of them I'm going to mention when we go down to the den. They're relating mainly to that Mercedes that we've got down there. But on the XJ Coupe that we've just seen in the metal shop, he had a few design tasks on that. One, we're doing a little section in the middle of the boot lid that has it will be chromed with a little badge on it that flips up and has the lock for the boot behind it. Completely redoing how it was originally. So there's a big chunky chrome thing with the number plate lights. It's got a handle that you release the boot with a lock within it that stops it being able to turn. So we're cleaning all of that up. The number plate lights are going to be flushed in underneath the sort of sheet metal part of the boot lid that overhangs the plate. And then yeah, this little block, which is currently a 3D print, which is going to be a hinge section with a lock, and you just turn the lock to open the boot rather than having a separate handle and lock. Then he's just doing some very initial stabs at wing mirror design on that. We're trying to take a bit of the shape of the door handle and then kind of mirror that and have it at the front of the door as the base for the mirror mounting. And then he's just been, he's done the air feed, so where Stu's done his little cylindrical air filter housing. Luke's now designed the top housing of that, which basically has the spigot for the filter and then feeds it out, and that feeds to the air intake on the engine. That's going to be a 3D printed final part, so we've modelled that, ready to make that. So yeah, he's been on with a variety of little tasks. A lot of what's going on in here at the minute is actually relating to the Redux BMW M3s that we build, but we don't really show those. So sometimes there's weeks where it doesn't look like we've achieved a great deal because it's on cars that we're not allowed to show. But on that note, I'm going to go down the den because there is some stuff we can look at down there. Huzzah! Right, welcome back to the den and the usual hive of activity. So I'm going to start with the Mercedes 124, which was primarily here for interior, which Richard will tell you about and what his progress is on that. But while we're on it, we thought some custom touches would be cool, or the owner thought that some custom touches would be cool and asked us whether we might be able to execute such things, which we have. So the gear shifter surround, if you like, kind of the bit with the slotted gate in it. We have done machined in aluminium, and that's come back from Andy at Concept 303, who's now machined that for us. I think there's just a 3D print of that sitting in the car at the minute. We also, I think we showed the early stages of this last week, we've done a funky little insert for the ashtray. We've just got to do the mounting points for that, but it's ready to go in now. So we could mount the Airlift Performance air ride controller in the ashtray in a way that looked really neat and like it always lived there. So eventually when you pop the ashtray open, that'll be within there and it'll just close up again so it can be hidden away when it's not in use. And then you'll see in the car now, Richard's trimmed all of the dash strips and the door strips that used to be wood in that lovely sort of houndstooth cloth. The dash central fascia and console used to also be wood, and the owner requested that we do those in some sort of black finish. So we've done them in a black with a matte lacquer over it. Actually, I say we've done that. I think the guys are just prepping the parts for that, but we've done a sample piece which we sent to him. He's okayed the finish, so they are going to be like a black with a matte lacquer on. It just makes them a little bit tougher than literally just going straight in with a black, solid black finish with no clear coat on it. So that's all good. And then Nick's going to be doing a mechanical inspection on that because, well, the car was here. The customer said, well, actually, you're doing a load of work on the car anyway. Why not give it the den treatment, do a full inspection, report back to me, and we can decide if there's any mechanical work to go through on that. And actually, he's also bringing a couple of other cars for us to do the same on. So yes, and in fact, on that note of the fact we have quite a lot of cars in the pipeline here, we have decided that we are already in a position to take on another member of staff. So Nick's looking for a competent and experienced mechanical technician to join him here. So if you think that might be you and you want to work on an awesome variation of cars, then get in touch. Just drop him an email, nick@thedenautomotive.co.uk. Moving on from that, Mustang. So I think he's been working on that at the minute and is actually just preparing to put the engine back in this. This was to try and sort some oil leaks, which, having been through the engine now, we're not really surprised existed because it's quite an antiquated design. You sort of forget that it is a 1965 car, so the engine was like an early 1960s design. So crank seal looked like it might, there was various areas that looked like they might have been leaking. The valley gasket hadn't been very well sealed, so we suspect that might have been one source because there was evidence of oil coming down from the top of the engine. Then we also suspected sump gasket because there was a little deformation of the sump where it meets its gasket, so we've smoothed that out, got a new gasket, resealed all of that. We wanted to see whether the crank seal was leaking, so as a sensible precaution, after leaving the sump gasket to set the sealant on there, we filled it right up with oil and kind of upended it, initially making the mistake that we didn't realise the flywheel holes or the flex plate holes actually go all the way through the crank, which is not actually that common. So without the bolts in there, the oil just comes straight out through the holes, which of course means you also need to thread seal all the bolts against the oil so the oil doesn't come out around the threads on the flywheel. Anyway, corrected that mistake, leak checked it with it inverted, and it did look like there was potentially an oil leak around the crank seal as well. So done the crank seal, and that was probably the most. It seems to be only one step on from a rope seal. It is rubber, but it's not. It's a very strange design and doesn't look overly convincing. So I'm not that surprised that it leaked. But we put a new seal in there, resealed it all as best as we possibly can. So fingers crossed, that's good to go now. So that's about to go back in this, and hopefully we will have a leak-free Mustang, which, having looked at the engine, I imagine is actually quite a rare thing. This, we've now had back lots of the parts. I don't know if I showed some of this last week, but all of the aluminium castings, so the rear hub carriers with lower arms, etc., they've all been bead plastered and then clear cerakoted to prevent them against that surface furring you get on aluminium parts. And then loads of the small parts and all the fasteners were bead blasted. They went away for zinc nickel plating and then were overcoated with black Xylan coating over the top of that. So they should be extremely corrosion resistant and resistant to damage on them. And yeah, we're gearing up now to be able to get everything back in that. The subframe's down there awaiting refitment. All the parts pretty much without exception are ready to go. So rear end will be going in that fairly soon, and it almost seems odd now I consider it that this has basically been a restoration of a car with only 8,000 miles on it, but it is going to look absolutely stunning underneath. So I mentioned that Luke was on with a few jobs relating to the den. I've obviously mentioned the bits on the Mercedes, but we've also done a couple of bits on this. The first one being the CarPlay installation. So I think I mentioned before, it's kind of got this integrated stereo in it, which isn't a double DIN size, it's smaller than that. So you can't just pop in a double DIN unit, and consequently there are no adapter kits available for that. But we wanted to try and put a head unit with CarPlay on it. Eventually found, I mentioned last week I think, or the week before, we were looking at an Alpine unit that was a perfect fit, but it didn't have wireless CarPlay. However, we found that there's a Pioneer unit which physically looks almost identical. In fact, I don't even know if maybe the two companies are related these days. But it does have wireless CarPlay. So that looked like the perfect fit. We had to make a very small adaptation of the top of the original surround so we could just click it past. It was literally like 2mm shy of fitting, so we could just ease it up, push it right the way in, and then let the frame settle back down in front of it. And then Luke's designed two really nice little infills that sit each side, which we've done 3D printed with a little brass threaded insert in the back. We've then painted them satin black so they match the original plastic. And that, yeah, it looks really good. That's ready to go in now and be wired up. And it should look extremely factory, so really, really nice. And then another modern touch we're doing on this is the final touch is doing a wireless phone charger in the center console. So right now Luke's just modelling and printing a prototype of an insert that will go into the original console in place of where it would have had the Fisher tape holders, if you remember those, going way back into the 80s. They were everywhere, but they have on these a little mold. This must have been right at the tail end of cassette stuff, but they have a little molded section where those tape holders would have gone. So in place of that, we're doing this little piece that will have a cordless charging pad. So with the wireless CarPlay, it basically means you can get in, put your phone in the console, hidden away, it'll be on charge, and you can use all of your Google Maps functionality, Spotify audio, whatever you use, which is just a really nice finishing touch for this car, which is looking absolutely stunning, I have to say. And we've had the wheels back from refurbishing and put them on, and it kind of, it's just reminded me how awesome these are. I used to be quite into Jag XJs, and I had quite a lot of them, probably going back 15 years, maybe even a bit more than that. But yeah, it kind of made me want one of those again. Right, that is that. Briefly mention that we have now had the gearbox for this rebuilt. That was done by All Gears, the 6-speed BMW E46 M3 box. So that's going to be dropped off with us this coming weekend. In fact, yesterday, if you're watching the video on the Sunday, and we'll be able to crack on and get that reinstalled in that, and that will be ready to hand back. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Richard to tell you a bit about what he's been on with.
How's it, everybody? Yes, some seats that you can see. Jamie will get some better close-ups. So short and sweet. Last week, I think you just saw a couple of panels and things like that. So I've just been very busy cutting leather, sewing leather, and then this week I started fitting it. So it's looking really nice. This is just been thrown on because as soon as I start assembling them more, then you start tweaking them and rubbing them, and I'll heat them with the heat gun a little bit here and there. I've got to be super careful because there's very 90s plastic piping on these, so I'll probably end up masking all of them 2 or 3 layers, and then you give it a bit of a heat gun, so you just got to be careful, and then that gun. But they came out really nice. It's just a bit of a touch here and there where you can see a crease here and there, which we'll sort out. Front seat's looking good. There's the back of it. I'm still going to redo these because this one looks okay, but the other seat, it actually started delaminating in these pieces here, so we'll just redo that with leather, so that's going to look great. And then the rest of the time I'm still sewing. I sew a bit, then I fit a bit, then I sew a bit and fit a bit, because so that I don't repeat a mistake or a fault or whatever you want to call it. So but it's coming together nicely. I think by next time you see me, this should be in the car hopefully, so I will see you guys next week.
Thank you very much, Richard. And I suppose we might as well just end on merchandise. So we've still got, well, a week and a bit, I guess, to go until Christmas. So get on the website, retropower.co.uk/shop. Get yourself hoodie, t-shirt, beanie, mug, keyring, whatever you want. Still time to get that in time for Christmas. So yeah, get on there, get your merch bought in time for Christmas, and we'll see you again next week.